if you're going to use TikTok and some of the newer things, and you're going to get hacked probably, and people just kind of go with that. But I want to hear more about AI and its influence on the future, and we can use AI as a positive tool to help secure everything that we've got. So instead of it being this bad thing that the bad guys are using to infiltrate and take over our systems, let's look at it, maybe a little bit from the defense, and then it's that war that happens outside of everything. But learning more about AI.
Jesus.
Well, you guys said quite a few things that I would echo myself, and one of the things that I just realized is, I've been doing this for 30 years myself.
Being only 35, that's amazing.
Thank you. So, Adam, thanks for the invitation, and thanks you guys, some familiar faces and new faces as well. My name is Jesus Jimenez. I've known Adam for 16 years now. I was his client.
Did I have hair when we met?
No.
Did I? No?
I did.
You did?
I did.
I've had a positive effect on him.
And I'm ex-Navy. That's where I started my entire comm career, secure satellite communications. So the phase array Aegis class cruiser, I was on one of them. You can go from the fire patrolman, but I'm very familiar with the technology going back to 1990. As I migrated throughout my career, I went from satellite from GEOs and LEOs and MEOs into a global managed service provider environment. You may be familiar with RigNet, that was eventually acquired by Viasat. I led the global engineering team for about a decade. And since then, what I've done is, where I'm at today, I run my small business, service disabled veteran-owned small business. And as part of that, what I effectively do is offer interim and temporary fractional services across operations, IT, CIO, fractional CIO, CISO as well. And what I do is, what I want to learn, or at least understand or get a better feeling of, and you kind of hinted on it in terms of AI. I went to a seminar late last year about AI, and the question is always, how are we going to integrate AI into our product portfolio or our service portfolio? But somebody brilliantly turned it around and says, how are we going to use AI to generate our future, to our roadmap? How do we use that to forward look? But at the same time, take a very cautious approach as to how we do that. Fundamentally, as a fractional CISO, I go down to the basics of what standards are you adhering to? What are you doing? I think the videos that you were showing are absolutely brilliant because they're comical. Most folks, they're not going to listen to a 15-minute video, but 30-second, 1-minute, 3-minute video, comically, works beautifully. So I really appreciate that. So that's good. So hopefully we can get an understanding of fundamentally where are the gaps and how are we filling those gaps with the basic fundamentals when it comes to cyber and AI.
Really appreciate you guys being up here. Appreciate the experience. I'm thinking of really profound questions, of course, to ask you, these experts. And of course, profound technical questions are not for the general audience. They want things to be easy. They want it to work. Tell me I'm wrong at any time. And I have known this a long time, so it's a little bit of an unfair edge, but your collective feedback on some of the really great questions that I always pose to him, I'm very interested to hear. And I'll tell you, one of the first ones that he and I recently talked about in regards to security, based on his experience and all the companies that RigNet and Viasat worked with, which are every and any major mining, construction, transportation company. They all have heavy regs that they have to adhere to. I was telling Jesus, I was looking at one of them, and I was pretty proud of them, and I don't even know them. And he's like, why are you proud? And I said, because on their public website, they detail how they adhere to those security policies. They talk about scans they run, how frequently. It wasn't just a fluff. It was some pretty detailed. And I was asking Jesus, why don't more people or more companies publish publish that on their website as kind of a sign of confidence to their customers. Asus, do you mind?
Yeah, I think.
Or actually, hang on. Do you mind if I have these two
Sure,
respond before you?
go ahead, yes.
Well, I think the problem is that people don't want to do what they don't have to do, right? So think about it, right? So if I, you know, I have all these compliances I already have to adhere to, and so I don't want to necessarily go up there and say I'm NIST certified and I'm, you know, SOC 2 certified unless I have to. And what we're running into in cybersecurity overall is that people say, well, I'm compliant, and they think they're also secure. That's a whole problem that we run into.
Mm-hmm.
And so companies are doing the minimum sometimes. They have to, and what we're seeing is a lot of tech debt. In security, we're seeing a lot of companies, and this unfortunately also happened across the COVID timeframe when everybody had to sort of go work remotely, and they just did what they had to make sure the business still operated.
Okay.
And so they sent everybody home, they said, here's a VPN, and so now as companies are kind of in this hybrid workforce, and they really do a deep dive into where they are, and they do a virtual CISO or they do a security assessment, they realize they're not close to where they need to be.
Okay.
And so if I say I'm compliant and then I suffer a breach, somebody's gonna sue me. If I go on there and say that I'm NIST certified and NIST secure, and then I suffer a breach and they do a root cause analysis on the back end of it, I'm going to find myself probably held to some sort of higher standard. And I think that's one of the reasons companies don't want to say that.
So when I read that statement, I felt somebody at that company, and it's a major operator, had pretty good confidence about what they were doing. Asus, you felt that was, actually, let me ask Dave about it first. Dave, how do you feel about something like
So
that?
interesting that they would publish everything. So a lot of people are like, well, that's open, that's good and everything, right? But what I'm hearing and seeing, the bigger companies who have a budget and they're getting beat up about regulatory and compliance, two different things, all the time, they're like, we might as well embrace it. We might as well be proactive about it. We might as well get into it and do it. Whether they want to publish or not, that's kind of, I wouldn't. You know,
Okay.
you're back ending a roadmap. But the smaller companies, they're reactive. So proactive for the big guys because they got money, budget. They have systems that can automate their regulatory and things like that. So when regulatory changes, they can make sure that they're
Let's peel the onion back. Do you really think this company that's a major global operator that is advertising, and I'm not telling you they're giving away tactics and procedures, they're just saying, hey, here's part of our compliance program.
they're not giving away.
They're not giving away trade secrets, and I don't even think they're appealing to anybody who would even care who's trying to bring down the network.
And the only thing that could be is that like CMMC is a good one, right? So people are listing that on their website because that's now becoming a requirement for government contracts.
Okay.
And so if it could be more of marketing, sales side of it, where they're saying, yes, I'm this, so that when a company hits that front end and they say, oh, okay, I don't have to ask. And so I'm assuming that what we're seeing is supply chain pressures on companies.
Okay, so Asus, now marketing.
Yeah, no, excellent points. I think going back a few years, I had a CEO ask me, hey, now that we reach a certain level of security awareness and certainly standards, why don't we put it on our website? Why don't we do a press release, etc.? I said, no, we don't want to do that. Not only, again, 10 years ago is different than today. 10 years ago, you were actually inviting those, oh, you're at that standard. Let me come attack you personally. Now, in the petroleum world, energy world, June 22nd, I believe, it's every year, Anonymous goes after all of the energy industry across the globe. So you have to be very careful. I think it's June 22nd. Anonymous will go after you. If you're not fair to your employees or to the world or to consumers, they're going to go after you. So the last thing we want to do is in the month of May or April announce that you're reached certain standards. They're going to come after you immediately. They're not going to wait until June. So
Is that because they know the weakness of the compliance, or is it because there's a challenge?
it's both.
Both.
It's both, 'cause they're going to
hackers love a challenge, and
They're
many of
gonna-
them will go after just for the challenge.
Yeah.
It's also the summer solstice, so it's the longest day of the year right around then. So maybe
They have a little extra time.
That's
to
right.
have.
They're going to do that. So
Asus, can we separate like ISO 27001 type from more cyber specific?
You
As
can.
far as advertising, hey, we're compliant to this, because you see a ton of industrial companies saying, hey, we're ISO 27000,
Right.
I think 3 key ones.
But I think for now, including CMMC, but I think for now, 10 years ago it was a little bit different. Today, I don't think it will resonate as much as it used to in terms of I reached a particular standard. CMMC level 1, level 2, as it's continuing to morph into 2.0, I don't think it's as impactful that they're going to come after you. They're coming after you regardless. Now, today, I used to believe in the philosophy that most companies, if not all, are under 2 conditions. 1, they've been hacked and they know it, or 2, they've been hacked and they don't know yet. So that's kind of still true today to a certain extent, and most employees, especially outside of the engineering or IT side, are the culprits.
I've added a third one to that. They've been hacked and they're going to get hacked again, or they've been hacked a second time. So we're actually starting to see a repeat now, where ransomware is starting to cycle, where there's a saturation and they're actually coming back after repeat targets. And companies that aren't solving their problems are getting recidivism rates of 70, 75%, especially when they try to, this is an issue I run into, is they try to home fix it.
Mm-hmm.
They try to have their IT team do the fix instead of actually bringing in a true incident response company. And I'm seeing it over and over and over again. And so one of my messages has become, you can't fix this. These guys are good. They know how to hide. They know how to avoid you. So they're, oh, I'm going to do a reload. Not going to work. And so that's the other thing we're running into is that companies are, to your point, and especially in the SMB marketplace, and we're seeing this repeatedly in this SMB side. Larger side's a little different because they get to when you get to a certain size, you have your own team, right? So you talk like the BPs and you talk about the big oil and gas companies. BP right here in Katy has its own very large SOC right here in these buildings. They manage the entire network of their OT, IoT across the world. And so they are much more active. They don't have to go outside. In that mid-sized market, though, we run into companies that, I can do this. And CEOs sometimes tell that story, and CISOs tell themselves that story, and they're fooling themselves.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's I appreciate you doing that. Anybody have any questions? Todd, do you think of anything as far as advertising your tactics and procedures? Have you seen anybody doing that? Advertising what they do, how they do it?
Can I add a comment to what you were talking about in terms of I meet a standard and then through an audit or an assessment you find that you in fact are not meeting that standard? Well, if you think about the cyber insurance industry today, it's come along so nicely, well, in a good way or in a bad way, depending on how you want to look at it, whereby the blame used to go to the board, and it quickly evolved into what does the cyber insurance policy say? If you have cyber insurance in your organization and you said I meet certain standards, NIST, ISO, PCI, DSS, CMMC, and then we find during an assessment after an incident that you were not complying with that, well, guess what is written in the fine print of your cyber insurance? It's null and void. You're not covered any longer. So that's one thing to keep in mind as well.
Well, insurance is an interesting model. I put cyber insurance today as the car industry in America in 1950, maybe the 60s. They've collected enough data now to know what is successful, right? So in the 50s, they started realizing if you were a 21-year-old boy and you drove around in a fast car, you were more likely to have accidents, you were more likely to get speeding tickets. The insurance companies have now collected enough data on the companies that have been successful not being breached, that they can say, these are the companies that are successful. You have a true XDR, you have a true 24/7 managed, you have two-factor authentication, and they have these lists now. And so when companies were doing cyber insurance 10, 15 years ago, they got like 4 questions. And now it's 18 pages. And so cyber insurance has moved into a model where they say, now I know what it means to be successful. What was happening though is that companies are not having their IT people being involved in the insurance paperwork they're filling out. And so they're having a chief risk officer or a chief compliance officer filling out this form, and they're saying, do you have an endpoint protection product? Yeah, I got something on my machine, and that's what's getting people in trouble. And so one of my biggest things telling companies is you've got to make sure that when you do these policies, you have a team that helps you fill it out correctly. Because if you fill it out incorrectly, to your point, they will not cover the losses. They will say you are not going to get covered, and they will deny that coverage, and then you're really in trouble because
You're talking about the insurance
the
company.
insurance company will deny your claim.
Yeah.
It's like having a house and saying, yeah, my roof is fine.
Sure.
And then something rips through your roof, and they find out that you never got to repair it at the last whatever. They're going to void that policy.
Okay, so I'm beginning my second and last question for this panel, and then we're going to rotate. Difference between technical cybersecurity and social engineering. And I mentioned this to Jesus also. I remember going to the corporate office of RigNet frequently, and I'd park and I'd walk around, and I'd see USB sticks all over the parking lot. Some of them actually said RigNet on them. Some of them said Varco. They looked like they were customers who had visited. And I was like, what in the fuck is going on in this parking lot?
Salting.
I was pissed. I was like, I saw these, and then I saw credit cards. Just like little gas cards, credit cards. Frequently I would see this. I would clean it up. I'd pick a couple and throw them away. But I walked into the reception area, I looked at the receptionist, I was like, what do you do with these? It wasn't until I brought those to her that she ended up putting a plastic bucket in the reception area saying to dump all USBs in there. Do you remember many people coming back in the day, Jesus, plugging that stuff in?
Eventually it got faded away. Yes.
Well, go ahead and answer that, and then I'll follow up.
Yeah, and that was a big problem that we saw very quickly accelerate in 2015 and 2019.
Just stupid.
It was really, really bad.
Okay.
Fortunately, some measures were taken inside of our industry, the managed service provider, but even beyond. In today's world, especially in the government and DoD side, a lot of these devices are disabled. You can't even plug them in.
How long has that been? 5, 6, 7 years?
Approximately.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember seeing them on school grounds. I remember seeing them just in a variety of different places. Still to this day I do sometimes.
But think about the medium. The medium has changed. We don't have the USB drive anymore, but we have the cloud that still requires defense mechanisms to be put in place to protect those. So still have to take some measures.
So James, you mentioned something earlier, like you don't want to do what you don't have to do or something along those lines.
So
You see the,
So this is a-
USB stick.
yeah.
What do you want to do with this?
Statistically, there's studies around physical security companies have said that if I put 100 of those in the parking lot, free will end up in your network.
Mm-hmm.
If I put the corporate logo on, it goes to 6%. If I say corporate logo plus and I say secret, or I put something like that, the number jumps to 10. So it's successful. It was very successful in the mid-20s, and it's a Stuxnet carryover.
I
So
take
Stuxnet,
shit for this story, like I can't.
no, it's absolutely true. I mean, so Stuxnet, which was a very famous breach against
Sure.
the Iranians, that's how it was successful.
USB.
That's what they're saying that was the way that they did it. Was somebody, whoever it was, yeah, the centrifuge thing. They put these out in the parking lot of an Iranian enrichment plant, and somebody picked one of those up, brought it into the facility, plugged it in, and it installed a tool, and then eventually wormed its way back to the back end of the network to where the enrichment plant was, and then broke all of their centrifuges. So it's been successful, and that's why they keep trying.
So Dave, I'll give you this other question.
Well, let me hit this one.
Go ahead.
because it just the social, not the USB sticks, we killed that, but social engineering is where you started with that.
Please.
And so one of the things in some of the talks that I do, we talk about the cybersecurity kill chain. That first step is reconnaissance, so know thy enemy like you know thyself. So the bad guys are going to study people in the social engineering aspect of it. That second step is delivery. Well, delivery is all about deception. So now that I know who's the owner and that he goes, to a country club, I can send him emails that he's more likely to click on. All of that social engineering aspect of it. Even voice phishing now comes into the social engineering.
Mhm.
People are actually, it's like, well, the hell with email. Everyone's getting this email stuff up. We're just going to use good old phone stuff and use information that people have to do things. Whether that's NGM, call the IT support desk.
The MGM is a mouthful.
Call the IT support desk. Can you reset my credentials for me?
But not just reset the credentials, but I don't have my two-factor authentication, can you disable it? So the fact that a help desk was able to disable two-factor authentication for a new employee is incredible to me. But social engineering has been around for so long. I did an interview with Frank Abagnale from Catch Me If You Can, and it's on my YouTube channel. And he was saying that if he was doing today what he'd been doing back in the 60s, he'd be a billionaire. People want to believe a story. And so what's happening in your companies is, and this is where training comes in, training can't just be a phishing, because phishing is not the most successful way of doing it. The most successful way for me to do it is call in and say, I'm a customer, and start to engage in a long-term conversation around this customer thing. And what we're seeing, whether it's scams or whether it's a corporate account takeover, is they're spending a lot more time to cultivate a relationship with your employee, to where you're going to eventually trust this person enough to click on what they send, or you're going to send money. And I've worked a number of scams, and I had a woman here in town lost $140,000 because somebody contacted her about gold and doing gold investment. We're seeing this with cryptocurrency. We're seeing it with all this kind of stuff. And so your employees we're being bombarded by data. And to Dave's point, they are really cultivating it specific to you and to your employees. So one of the things I tell you is, are you scanning the dark web for your corporate information, especially with your IT teams and your executive teams? Are you training them on passwords? It's so simple, but if they're using the same passwords here and they're using the same password there, how's that being, we see people's home networks getting intruded upon, and they use that home network as a pivot into corporate networks. So this is the world that we're living in, and we're not separate anymore. And I think that's something where you talk about social engineering, we have to be much more active than just, here, click on a bad training and, oh, you did your annual training, we're good now.
Do you guys can answer this individually, but what do you find in people you see that you work with? What do you find is the hardest thing for them to say no about? And I don't mean buying product or anything. I'm talking about culture change to realize, hey, I could get tricked. It's not my fault. I'm up against somebody in a group that is designed to try and get me.
Security and convenience. That's what I find to be the biggest issue.
Log into the VPN.
Yeah, it's too hard to take that extra step, to do the extra security step.
Okay.
Two-factor authentication, like, I don't want to do that. And so they just want to keep it convenient and quick.
Okay.
And especially with executives. Executives get turned, don't do that extra step, I'll be fine. So a little bit of complacency maybe there too.
Dave, do you have any nugget on social engineering?
So many of it's been said so much, it's so obvious. Verify your source. I mean, the biggest thing is, if you think it's, they got the right bank account numbers, they got everything that looks right, it's like, get a separate path to get that verification. And if it sounds too good, I mean, you look at the Ubiquity hack, all of these different ones were millions of dollars. Facebook had a big hack a long time ago where it was almost $100 million that spread out over 18 months. And what was happening was fake invoices from a valid vendor that looked like, and it was a Taiwanese company that they just kept sending money. It only got found out from an Indian banker that was just doing some checking. And the FBI helped recover half of it because
Left at the bank.
See, so I'm going to ask you a kind of a question in closing here. Operational technology versus information technology, they're just two different worlds. They really are. The fact that they coexist is by, I'm sorry?
they use the same network.
Sometimes.
Well,
They should.
They should.
they are two different worlds. Within any business, IT is not OT. And so the adherence to stricter standards on the OT side, is there osmosis there, or are they just on their own?
The guidance on OT is through governance is increasing as we speak because of the vulnerabilities that we've seen throughout critical infrastructure, for example. And I think as part of that, the emphasis on getting those up to par where they should be has been dictated. However, it hasn't been embraced fully, especially on the OT side.
That's wrong. It's expensive, it's more expensive on the
It
OT
is.
side, isn't it?
Well,
There's not a lot of
it's getting
solutions.
better.
Yeah.
It's getting better in terms of the cost behind implementing on the OT side. And a lot of times what we're seeing now is that solution is part of a managed service that you can get.
Okay.
Because companies, over the last probably 4 years, companies are holding on to cash for just economic reasons that we've been seeing.
Mhm.
Perhaps this is that opportunity now that we're going to see with regulatory being involved, companies willing to let that cash out is going to finally happen, but at the same time, having that bundled service, if you will, to come in and to provide it as a managed service is quite a bit.
It seems like the OT people just get neglected. The IT
Oh, yeah,
people get
absolutely.
Well, one of the issues we run into with OT though is that OT, the downtime is impossible, right? So that I can't put security onto a product. There's no downtime available, right? So when I do a software update, for example, look at CrowdStrike as a good example. CrowdStrike, they go down, and that's unacceptable in an OT network.
Sure.
And so the decisions of security are often being made at the time in the operations center, not in the IT, kind of in that back, right?
Interesting.
And that's where there's a difference in the OT side. Now with IoT kind of crossing and bridging over, that's a whole different monster because as we see more video cameras and more IoT type devices ending up on these corporate networks, security is often neglected there. Because there's either not technology that really protects it, or like voice phones, right? VoIP phones are now a part of the IT stack, but they're really an IoT type device. Mobile devices, we're seeing a big problem in mobility of how do I protect this device that you bring in, but put on my corporate network and you have corporate data on it. And these are questions that we're still struggling with, and every company has to start having their own policy around it and thinking about what they're going to do to defend that.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.
You bet.
Great
Thank
job.
you. Good job.
Okay, so we're going to take a little bit of a break. You guys can sit down. And now that you've completed your first panel, you can go to